Mexican drug history will never be complete without the mention of Oscar Eduardo Guerrero Silva. He was a young man whose original dream was to serve and protect the Mexican people as a soldier, but ended up on the wrong side of the law. And this is softly said because the sick life he lived after going savage was not worth any amount of money. Eduardo's actual day and month of birth remain unknown, but he was born in 1971 in the border city of Reynosa, in the state of Tamaulipas, Mexico. He was fondly called Z8 and El Winnie Pooh. But make no mistake, he was anything but a warm and loving teddy bear. Eduardo was a drug lord and a top-ranking leader of the deadly and famous Los Zetas Mexican criminal group. Like most young men, Eduardo had dreams and aspirations of growing up, getting a great job, marrying the love of his life, and having beautiful kids together. He tried to pursue this dream when he married and later joined the Mexican military as an infantry soldier in 1992. Eduardo would later rise to the rank of corporal a year after, and it seemed like his dreams were on track. However, everything changed for Eduardo in 1999 when he deserted from the military. There's no public information about his reasons for leaving the Mexican army, but he quickly caught the attention of the Los Zetas and Gulf Cartel, who recruited him to work as a professional assassin. More about the cartels later. Oscar Eduardo Guerrero Silva's rap sheets. While Eduardo was still in the military and thinking about his departure, the Gulf Cartel, a powerful drug organization, was already doing crazy things in Mexico. To further boost its strength and create more fear in society, the boss of the Gulf Cartel, Osiel Cardenas Guillen, extended the cartel's reach even further by creating an assassination arm known as Los Zetas. Osiel focused on recruiting only ex-military, ex-police officers, and gang leaders into Los Zetas. Their primary aim was to assassinate all enemies and leave no traces that would come back to them. Like most members of the Los Zetas, Osiel reached out to Eduardo in the late 1990s and offered him more money than the Mexican army would have ever paid him. Resisting such an offer by a man from a poverty-stricken society with lofty dreams was next to impossible. But this would turn out to be the worst decision of his life. Eduardo quickly rose within Los Zetas. It wasn't long before he caught the attention of the Mexican authorities and became one of the country's top 50 most wanted criminals. So all of his former army buddies were looking for him across the country. Let's just say that this is not the nicest feeling in the world. The Los Zetas operated as hired assassins and armed bodyguards within Mexico and its environs. It was one of the deadliest criminal groups of its time. These men, and sometimes women, were not only highly trained but also knew the law and how to get away with many crimes because of their previous experience in the force and as gang leaders. In addition to drug trafficking, the criminal syndicate soon expanded its activities into other crimes such as kidnapping, sex trafficking, extortion, piracy, and oil theft, among others. The cartel would apply all means necessary to have its way and send fear and shock within society, rivals, and the government forces of Mexico. Some of its tactics included torture, assassination, beheading, and random murders. With its operations based in Nuevo Laredo, its activities covered most of Mexico, especially Tamaulipas, across the border from Laredo, Texas. As you might already know, Los Zetas were responsible for the Allende massacre with 300 victims, the first San Fernando massacre in 2010 with 72 victims, the second San Fernando massacre in 2011 with 193 victims, plus many more smaller gruesome acts. They also sometimes stopped random buses and made the male passengers fight with each other to death using hammers, knives, and machetes. And the winner of this crazy real-life gladiator-like game would win the main prize and join Los Zetas. But their life expectancy wasn't long because they were sent to suicide missions where they had to shoot rival cartel guys in dangerous neighborhoods. This is beyond sickening, but this is exactly what the former army professionals did to the Mexican citizens they promised to protect in their previous jobs. The Los Zetas was at one point the largest and most dreadful drug cartel in Mexico and its environs because of its expansive geographical spread. It had more presence than its close rival, the Sinaloa cartel. However, with more deserted military personnel joining the Gulf Cartel and the Los Zetas, the group broke away from the larger body in February 2010. They became a rival group to the Gulf Cartel. In December 2002, heavily armed men from the Gulf Cartel and the deadly Los Zetas, dressed in Mexican police uniforms, invaded and raided a prison in Matamoros, Tamaulipas. Their objective was simple: break out their colleagues who were in detention for various crimes including drug trafficking and murder. At the end of the operation, 3 notorious criminals and 1 woman were liberated. That incident got the attention of the Mexican authorities, who alleged that Eduardo was among the people who carried out the raid and prison invasion. Barely 2 years later, in January 2004, the scene of the prison invasion and break was in Apatzingan, Michoacan. El Winnie Pooh and more than 50 heavily armed men from Los Zetas broke into several prison cells and freed about 25 of their colleagues detained for several criminal offenses. The freed inmates included high-ranking members of the Los Zetas and drug kingpins of the Gulf Cartel. The whole operation looked like a SWAT operation, and in about 15 minutes, it was done. The invaders had come in, got their treasures, and left. Was Winnie Pooh ever arrested? After getting away with several crimes like murders, assassinations, drug trafficking, prison invasions, and others, the defunct AFI, Federal Investigative Agency, were starting to close in on Eduardo. The defunct agency, a copy of the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, was responsible for fighting corruption and organized crime. It was common for members of the agency to disguise themselves by wearing masks and other non-uniform dressing to carry out their operations. They did this to avoid being identified by gang members who could attack them and their families. In February 2004, the investigation around Eduardo and his activities reached advanced levels, and the stage was set for his arrest. On his part, Eduardo had become increasingly suspicious of everyone around him. He feared that one of his people might sell him out to the authorities for a bargain. So, when the AFI cornered and raided an apartment at the Riveras del Rio in Guadalupe, Nuevo Leon, they expected to corner and arrest Eduardo, but that was not the case. Along with another arrest, the AFI discovered a corpse identified as the body of Eduardo in one part of the house. He had a gunshot wound to his temple, which came from a 9mm pistol in his hand. Eduardo was never arrested. Instead, he killed himself before the authorities got to him. Eduardo's family and the reason of his PTSD. Details about Eduardo's childhood are sketchy, but in 1990, he married Gabriela Cervantes Zamorano before he joined the Mexican army. However, their relationship seemed to die naturally when Eduardo left the military to join the Los Zetas. According to Gabriela, Eduardo stopped visiting her, but resorted to calling and sending money instead. It became clear to her that he was no longer interested in their marriage, especially when she started hearing about other women in his life. During his lifetime, Eduardo visited Guadalupe, Nuevo Leon, quite often, not just because it was his official residence, but because that was where his other love interest was. In May 2005, another acquaintance of Eduardo, Gilberto Lopez Barrera, a brother to Yvonne Lopez Barrera, a mistress of Eduardo, was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including murder and drug trafficking. He too was a member of the deadly Los Zetas. Oscar Eduardo Guerrero Silva had a brother named Ciro Guerrero Silva. They enlisted in the army at the same time and deserted to join the Los Zetas about the same time. Ciro, who was a member of the elite GAF unit, was not known in Los Zetas as Eduardo's brother. He was later accused of betraying the criminal syndicate by giving the authorities the DEA information about the cartel. When Oziel, the biggest boss of the Gulf cartel, learned about his betrayal and that Ciro was Eduardo's brother, he had Eduardo investigated and cleared of all accusations. But Ciro was indicted. Eduardo begged for his brother Ciro, but it all fell on deaf ears. Oziel Cardenas was not going to forgive him. Eventually, he joined in punishing his brother, who was severely tortured and castrated. As a sign of loyalty to the cartel, Eduardo was saddled with the responsibility of performing the coup de grace by shooting his brother in the head, which he did. Some members of the Los Zetas said Eduardo was never the same since he shot and killed his brother, as a mark of respect and loyalty to the group. It was believed in some quarters that he suffered PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which led to his eventual suicide.